Right now, that does not mean that we don't continually do base building throughout. It's not linear. So base building steps do not always follow each other in the same order. People enter the organization in a range of ways, and organizers adapt to that. It's analytical and nuanced. You exercise judgment about how much time to invest in each person to deepen his or her involvement. It's persistent. You call many people many times to get them to commit and remind them to turn out to actions. You contact them in person, by mail, by phone, social media, and it's time intensive. You spend a lot of time trying to bring people into the organization, keep them involved, and develop their leadership. It's also, well, in organizing, we talk to dozens of people on a regular basis if we're doing good base building and leadership development. Everyone you recruit and develop has a relationship with you, with other members, and with the organization. And it's also directive, so you have a focus. You bring info and people into the organization. We're not an outreach organization just bringing educational information out to people. We're actually looking for people to help engage with us and build power. So next slide. So we really want to ask the question when we begin base building, who is the most impacted? And as Troya said in the chat Tuesday, I keep wanting to say yesterday, it's not because they're the most oppressed, but because they have the greatest stake in the outcome. And we're all affected by that outcome. All of our futures, our liberation is tied together in working for justice. Next slide. So you want to figure out where are those people who are most impacted and then target your outreach. It's not unfocused, it's strategic. Next slide. And there are a number of levels that we can look at when doing base building. The core is your base of people who are most directly affected and really want to get involved, have desire to make change. They're either already involved or they really want to be involved. Then the next, that red layer, that's the second layer of outreach that you might consider in base building. And those are the people who are directly affected, but maybe they're not already involved or aware of the issue. And so how do we engage their interests to become active? And all of these are taking different strategies. You might not have the same wrap, you might not have the same strategy for outreach and base building to the core versus the red and the blue. And then there's the mass base. That's a much larger number. It's people who might not be, a frontline community directly affected, but they are in connection to the issue. So ally organizations, people who live in geographic proximity to frontline communities, people who might have an interest in this issue for another reason. Those are your blue, and that's the largest number of people that you can reach. Next slide. So we have to plant a lot more seeds than we need to turn into plants, so to speak. In base building, the rule of organizing is contact 100 people for every 10 that you want to get involved. So raise your hand. Have you ever heard anything like this? That this sort of rule of organizing? Is this brand new to you? Raise your hand if you've heard something like that before. So it's really, I don't see a lot of hands. It's really important to keep in mind. Yeah, it definitely makes sense. And then it's why also to know, don't get frustrated when you talk to 100 people and 10 get involved, right? So next slide. So what are some of the tactics that you currently use in your Mothers Out Front team to build your base? What do you currently do to build your base at Mothers Out Front? What are some tactics you use to build your base? One-on-ones, house parties, ask members to invite others, tabling. Good stuff. Listening sessions in the parks, emails, Facebook posting. Great ideas. So next slide. And then the different base building methods, as we said, we're going to cover today are outreach to centers of community, canvassing, tabling, and social media. So let's get into that right now. Next slide. We're going to start with Beth with outreach to centers of community. Take it away, Beth.
Hi, it's good to see you all again. Could I have the next slide, please? So I'm Beth Cradatis, and many of you, I think, were here for Tuesday night's presentation. We talked a lot about C5, which is, so I'm from Richmond, Virginia, and we've partnered and supported a group called C5 Concerned Citizens of Charles City County for the past 2 years. Could I have the next slide, please? And Sheila asked me to talk about centers of community, which, as I understand it, this is basically about identifying the organizations or the centers of community, the institutions, the groups, literally sometimes places, but also sometimes virtual places or conceptual places where people already gather and have authority or credibility or community. And finding ways to communicate within those groups or to make partnerships with those groups when you are trying to build your own base. So this could be groups like schools, churches, libraries, parks, but it could also be organizations like the NAACP or the Ruritans or book clubs or the Master Naturalists, sororities, PTAs, different things like that. Next slide, please. And it's important to directly identify leaders in these spaces. These are the keys to the communication, to communicating with and mobilizing in a community, especially if that community is one where you might have your own social network, but you want to, of course, broaden that. So Sheila asked me to speak to this because this is something that we did when our Mothers Out Front team sought to mobilize residents in Charles City County to stop a gas plant. So we ended up reaching out to a church, Cedar Grove Baptist Church, which is a church that's 5 miles from the site of one of the largest merchant gas plants that's been planned for the United States. We found by contacting the senior pastor of Cedar Grove Baptist that he had no idea that this gas plant was even under consideration. We formed a really powerful and lasting relationship with that church. A lot of our core members, the folks who ended up forming C5, not all of them, but several of them were members of this congregation. This is a church that's been around since 1875. It's an existing center of power or center of community in Charles City County. And because of their interest in stopping the gas plant, coinciding with our interest in stopping the gas plant, I would say that Cedar Grove remains one of the keystones to the success of our efforts to mobilize in Charles City. Next slide, please. So how do you identify where centers of community are? So first, let me back up a little bit. I myself am not from Charles City County. Most of our Richmond team had no history or experience in Charles City County when we started our mobilization efforts there. And the way we actually contacted the members of Cedar Grove, but also all of the other folks in Charles City, is literally we used Google Maps. And we created this spreadsheet where we just did we spent a lot of time on Google, trying to see what organizations already existed in Charles City County that we might find leaders in and speak to and see if we could make connections with. And so we wrote up letters and sent them out to the addresses that we found on Google Maps. We spent time on Facebook. And this was largely because we weren't particularly familiar with Charles City County. I mean, I had driven through the county, but I didn't have connections there. If, however, I had connections in Charles City County, the smart thing to do would be to start by really talking to people and listening to finding out what kinds of organizations were they aware of in their county. But if you don't have that possibility, I would say it would be worthwhile to do both. Spend some time on Facebook and on Google trying to see what organizations exist there. Is there someone from that organization that you could contact, that you could talk to? And hopefully that would give you a space to learn some things. Next slide, please. And then it's important to build a meaningful relationship with the centers, those centers of community. So for Charles City County, once we had made a connection with the pastor from Cedar Grove Baptist Church, we really quickly shifted from we're coming here to mobilize you to how can we support whatever it is you want to do. So all of the leadership and the decision making came out of that center of community rather than vice versa. For example, we didn't use this as an opportunity to recruit people into our Mothers Out Front chapter. Instead, we waited and listened and discovered that they wanted to form an organization, which they did, became Concerned Citizens of Charles City County. And we did not, as the outsiders, we did not have a vote in the decision making that they did from that point on. We instead were there to play kind of logistical and support roles whenever they needed that support. And so we think it's really important to think about how, how to play that role when you're working with an existing, for example, with this church, it has been around since 1875. They have their own structure, they have their own history, they have their own connections. Nothing that we say is going to be as powerful as the credibility they've already built up in their own community. So next slide, please. Okay, so now I'd like to turn it over to all of you. If you could put in the chat some of the centers of community that you might go to for either for ground truthing, in order to learn more about what residents in the communities you want to work with, what they might be concerned about, what can you do to reach out to centers of community. So if you could put that in the chat, that would be great. Yeah, I'm seeing faith communities, NAACP, school groups, senior centers, councils on aging, HOAs, faith communities, this is great, neighborhood development, business councils, tenant organizations, skate parks, scouts. That's awesome. Public housing, I hadn't thought of skate parks, so that's really creative. Local library, yes. Okay, well, it looks like people are running out of steam a little bit. CPOs, PTOs. I'm guessing PTOs are parent-teacher organizations. Okay, cool. I don't know what CBOs are. Parks near affordable housing. Oh, community-based organizations. Yes, love it. That's cool. Community mutual aid organizations. And I know a lot of those developed in the past year in response to COVID. So yeah. All right, well, I don't want to encroach on the next person's time. So I'm going to turn it over. Next slide, I think is it going to be Velma is next? Can I have the next slide, please? Yeah, I think this is Velma and Jamie. So I'm going to turn the floor over to them. Thanks.
Thank you, Beth.
Hi, thanks, Beth. So my name is Velma Campbell. I'm a member of Mothers Out Front from the Pueblo team in Colorado. My pronouns are she, her, and Aya. Pueblo, Colorado, I want to say is my home and the heart of my activism in the community, and for a world in which all can thrive, especially the children and the future generations. So I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with everyone about our environmental and climate justice issues and one of our favorite tabling activities. So Jamie, why don't you introduce yourself and our community?
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Jamie Valdez, and I'm the community organizer for Mothers Out Front for Pueblo and the Southern Colorado region. My pronouns are he, him, elle, and I'm a parent and a grandparent, and I'm concerned about the world we're likely to leave for our future generations. I'm also a native of Pueblo, Colorado. Pueblo is a low-income community with a largely Latinx and indigenous population, and like other frontline communities, very little political power. I've witnessed my community be used as a sacrifice zone for dirty, polluting industries no one else wants in their communities all my life, and I recognize that working across race and class is necessary to make change on the scale required for the crisis at hand. With that in mind, one tactic we use to build our movements is tabling at community events and activities.
So let's have the next slide and the next one. So let's ask, as we're getting started, who at this meeting has tabled before. Raise your hands or put it in chat while we're getting started. And let's have the next slide, please. So what as as we often get asked, what is tabling? Sort of a funny word. And why table? Well, simply put, tabling is the process of setting up an informational table regarding our organization at an event where we can reach out to lots of people, particularly in our target demographic. Those are people with whom we want to build a relationship. So why tabling? Well, it's also an activity. It's also an activity that has multiple benefits. An opportunity to ground truth, by which Mothers Out Front means listen to the community and learn more about the people in it, their issues, hopes, strengths, and other characteristics. It's also an opportunity to share information about Mothers Out Front and to interact with people who might be interested in engaging with Mothers Out Front, and we can obtain their contact information for follow-up. So what else might be accomplished by tabling? Put your ideas in the chat if you like, while Jamie shares with us some more specific thoughts about the importance of tabling for organizing across race and class.
Thanks, Velma. So anytime we plan to work in a community, especially those related to culture or identity, if we're not familiar with the culture or the other identity involved, we should do some research and go into the event with an understanding of why we are there and what we are celebrating, commemorating, honoring, etc. We want to not only show our support, but also actively participate in the celebration, commemoration, or whatever, to whatever degree is appropriate and to which we are comfortable. These are perfect opportunities to learn about the communities we hope to serve. With that in mind, we want to build bridges by the way we do this is by picking events to table at that represent a constituency that we want to work with and get to know and build a relationship with. We want to meet them where they are. If we want to have a diverse network and community, we have to go where people already are and where they feel comfortable. Again, this is a great chance to learn about the communities we hope to serve. This is an opportunity to listen and ask the open-ended questions and take interest in the organizations and issues represented there. We can find common ground. In these spaces, you'll get to know other organizations and people that represent the communities you are seeking to join with, and will often be able to identify shared interests. We want to build trust. This is one of the main points here. Sometimes you may have a request or an ask, like a petition, for example, but it's really important to show up, show support for their cause, and build trust first. And lastly, have fun. Smiling and laughing are contagious. When we smile, we look like we're having a good time and people want to be around us. It's welcoming. These events are often related to celebrations of some kind, and it's okay to enjoy them. Ultimately, folks are more likely to show up for us if we've shown an interest in building a relationship based on community and trust. So why is tabling important for organizing across race and class? For building community and solidarity, as well as for our own personal growth.
Thanks, Jamie. Can we have the next slide, please? So Post-its, all sizes, shapes, and colors. Let's think about what are some events where our Mothers Out Front teams could table to begin building some of these relationships across race and class, go ahead and click on the chat or double click in any shape to chat your response. And we'll give it a couple of minutes to get some responses in. And then Jamie's gonna give us a story about a recent successful event that we went to. Oh, the document to click on the post-it notes is now in chat. So we have Mexican Independence Day celebrations on September 16th, local farmers markets, good idea, environmental festivals, Earth Day events. What about some
Absolutely.
in town and
Absolutely. These are great ideas.
yeah,
Keep them coming.
right. Jamie, why don't you go ahead with our story of Juneteenth?
Absolutely. Thanks, Velma.
Let's have the
So-
next slide, please.
Thank you. So when tabling, especially at cultural events, it's important to go into the event having done some research and with an understanding of the cultural significance of the event. So to give some background on Juneteenth, which is what you see in the picture there, at midnight on January 1st, 1863, the Emancipation Proclamation took effect, and slaves in the southern United States were free. However, it would be another 2 years before those in Texas would be able to experience freedom because the proclamation couldn't be enforced in states under Confederate control, and it would take until June 19th of 1865 for the Union Army to carry out the proclamation. This became known as Juneteenth, and on this day, we celebrate the freedom of a people. In Pueblo, Juneteenth started in 1978 as barbecues in the backyards of folks who moved here from southern states and brought the tradition with them. But in 2 short years, the celebration quickly grew, and since 1980, Juneteenth has been celebrated as an official full-blown extravaganza with great food, music, guest speakers, and other fun activities. It's important to make these connections with the communities we hope to serve and the people we hope will support and work along with us. It's important also to get out to events even when we're not hosting and have a presence in order to show an authentic desire to support.
Excuse me.
By doing this, we build trust that will hopefully yield a mutually beneficial relationship. In other words, we meet them where they are. This is how we build strong, sustainable, and diverse movements and organizations. At Juneteenth, we talked to a whole bunch of amazing people, very eager to learn about our work. And once they learned about it, they were eager to show support. We weren't asking any money for the Mothers Out Front t-shirts we were giving out, but many people insisted on donating anyway. And several put the shirts on right there and then over the shirts they were already wearing. And keep in mind, this was on a sweltering 100-degree day. Before long, you couldn't look in any direction before seeing a Mothers Out Front t-shirt. Our name was out there, and we brought in roughly 25 brand new contacts who signed up for our contact list on the sign-in sheet we had out on our table. To top this all off, we had a blast hanging out with each other, with other members of our community, and I can say from experience that the barbecue brisket was the bomb. So don't be afraid to have fun. Next slide.
Great. Thanks, Jamie. And I can say it was fun. We were right across, Jamie picked a great spot right across from the jazz group that played all day too. And so we had music and food and good friends. So let's talk a little bit about the nuts and bolts of how to table. When we're getting ready to do tabling, we think about our events. We pick the event thoughtfully, hopefully, and we do research, considering factors that Jamie mentioned, such as the significance of the celebration, the constituencies that we want to build a relationship with, and issues that we might want to support. Then we contact the organizers and get permission to be there. Find out the rules and the cost of the tabling at their event. Also logistics such as parking. If the area is not familiar to our group, a survey trip to view the location is also a good idea. We also recruit and train volunteers to woman or person the table. It's a great opportunity to engage volunteers with our organization in an enjoyable activity that doesn't require a sustained time commitment. It's useful to support the volunteers with training that includes a run through of the mechanics of tabling, as well as the nature of the event, any special expectations or needs that the volunteers or the event might have, and our messages. What do we hope to make the connection? How do we hope to make that connection? So Jamie, can you talk a little more about how we work at our tables and bring us to a conclusion here?
Happy to. Thanks, Velma. It can be helpful to create a wrap or elevator talk, so to speak, that tells about Mothers Out Front and the work we do, but also opens the door for the other person, the person you're talking to share their interests. For example, I usually start by asking folks if they're familiar with Mothers Out Front, and then letting them know that we are a mother-founded, mother-led climate justice organization working toward the goal of a livable climate for all children, which I like to follow up by asking if they have any local climate or environmental issues about which they're concerned or have questions. This opens the door to talk about some of our local work on air and water quality, protection of public lands and wildlife, as well as our work opposing extraction, exploitation, and racism. At many of these events, especially those related to marginalized and oppressed cultures or identities like Juneteenth, Pride, Cinco de Mayo, etc., you will often find folks very willing to talk about the structures that uphold white, cis, hetero, patriarchal culture and how we can effectively overcome them. For logistics, always remember to bring a sign-up sheet and get contact information. This is very important. Also bring a handout or business cards or brochures or something like that with information about Mothers Out Front, including contact information. Be sure to nurture the new relationships you've begun. Do your follow-up. Enter your data and set up one-to-one conversations with interested people or organizations you've met with within 1 to 2 weeks at the most. And the last thing I want to mention is we've created a pretty comprehensive checklist that we'll be happy to share with all of you tonight. We'll put a link to that in the chat. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next section, which is on canvassing. And I think Barb Adams is going to be our next speaker. So next slide, please. Oh, there we are. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks. Next slide, please. Hi. My name is Barb Adams, and these presentations, I got to say, are wonderful. I'm really enjoying them. So I'm just going to try to add to them, but there's a lot of the same content that flows all through them. I also live in Richmond and Virginia, and I'm a cheerleader, an advocate, and an ally with the Charles City County C5 group for 2 wonderful years. My pronouns are she, her, and I live in the James River watershed. Next slide. My canvassing has been mostly in Charles City County, but other places where communities are facing poisonous industries. And I've also canvassed for candidates, getting petition signatures and encouraging voter rights. The main purpose of door-to-door canvassing is to make personal contact where people live. It's an essential tool of grassroots organizing. It is time and labor intensive, and because of that, it has the potential to make a very big impact. I begin this list with listening because a resident may know nothing about the issues that we want to speak to or canvass about, but we probably don't know very much, if anything, about what is important to them. And we should and need to know what is important to them if we want to be authentically caring and make a positive difference. Our work will be more meaningful with this foundation. We also canvass, of course, to inform on issues and events we're organizing around and possibly recruit new volunteers and new team members. If you have canvassed before, please share what in the chat, what were some of your positive or important learnings that you had in doing this? Okay, while I'm waiting for for things to come in, people like to talk. Yes. Most everybody wants to, if people are willing to listen, it's a rare thing these days in some ways. So yes, you need patience. People are afraid to speak up. Oh, wonderful. So in this situation, there was a team of 2 people, one was Spanish speaking, one was English. So that's awesome when you can do that, especially knowing what your community is all about. Thanks. Oh, you're surprised at who the supporters and who didn't support. Yeah, don't assume, don't make assumptions. Always a good idea. People say amazing things. People like gifts. Oh, I was thinking maybe if people are like gifts, but also people like gifts too. Great, these are all wonderful. Thanks for sharing. Next slide. Thank you. This is sort of the canvassing checklist, the canvassing 101. I won't go through all of these specifically because I think, and if you can have access to this later, you can sort of go into a deeper dive about all of them. Since it is a labor and time intensive experience to do canvassing, we want to get the most out of it. So planning and organizing skills are really important. If your group is small, it doesn't mean you can't canvass, but you may want to choose a smaller area to cover or get some groups or volunteers from other groups like college students or church members. In Union Hill and Buckingham County, where they were facing a mega compressor station, the group there got college environmental activists to help, and there was a beautiful and lasting relationships that were formed among all of them. So it's really wonderful. Choose communities thinking not just of who you know or what communities that you do know and maybe have the idea of what they're gonna share, but where are the most impacted communities or where are key places that you want to build some connections. I've emphasized do your homework because it just makes sense, but also being aware of some of the issues of a community before you actually go into it personally will help in your messaging, how to create your messaging, how you want to approach, and maybe have more meaningful conversations. For example, if you know that there are big issues with schools, understanding that for parents, that might be on the very top of their list, but you could connect the dots with them about issues that you have that you come to share about with them. I've also emphasized debriefing because most groups don't do that or not very thoroughly. Canvassing can be a really rich experience and we don't want to waste all that richness, especially for all the time and energy it uses. So not just the numbers, how many places did you go? How many signatures did you get? How many flyers did you give out? But it's really the fuller picture that you want to document with any of your notes that you take. Look over these. Are there any questions about them or any that I haven't included? Put them in the chat. Thanks. I'm going to move on just because I want to make sure we have plenty of time. Our next slide. Why is canvassing important for organizing across race and class? The deeper exploration and discussion from others up front about organizing around race and class is really essential work. And doing canvassing is a really firsthand experience of why it might be important to be doing this deeper work. Next slide. Some examples, we learn more about a community when we experience it firsthand, when we actually are walking the streets, talking to folks on the street, talking to folks in their home. We exhibit a commitment by putting the time and energy to listen and share. A one-on-one experience, which is what you mostly have in canvassing, is really a valuable and meaningful opportunity. By doing this, we're essentially saying we're here to listen to you and talk face-to-face about some issues that are impacting our community at a time when conversations like this are often very rare. Some of the other reasons are on this slide, but looking at the checklist of what we just looked at, are there other ways that we can include thinking of race, working across race and class in our planning for canvassing and not just these? Going at different times of day, yeah, acknowledging, thank you. the language question. Language is so important. That came up on the earlier training. Language is so essential. What languages, well, not just language in terms of, are they Spanish speaking, English speaking, but also what language you embody into your message is really important. What about homes that don't want to see strangers on their doorsteps? You know, that's an important reality, and we are coming into their space. So we'll talk a little bit more about that, but we want to be respectful. So if people don't want us to be there, then we need to really honor that and maybe leave a flyer with them, but leave. Be open, don't make assumptions. Honestly, that's great. Next slide. Building a meaningful experience. Some things to remember while you're canvassing. Certainly go in pairs. And this is not just because it's more fun and we want to have fun in doing it. It's also safer. And it's helpful to work in pairs to remind each other there's points that we haven't made or things that we haven't said. So we can be memories for each other. And also while one person is in a conversation, the other person can take notes. So, and people really have different things to share, different things that they think. So when you're talking with someone in a canvassing situation, you can really maybe pick up on different body language or different things that they've said. So it's a great teamwork experience. Also, sometimes you can't always stay in a pair. If you're running out of time or you need to do something, you can split up if you have a pair. So you can maybe go to places that are close to each other and then come back together quickly and share notes. But your most important goal is to make personal contact, connect with people, and relate as best you can. Next slide. So I've already talked about a couple of those, but about showing respect. Again, you're entering someone else's property uninvited and asking for their time. Introduce yourself and why you're canvassing and ask them if they have a few minutes to talk. And like we said, this question in the chat, which I've experienced where people don't have any time. And I was happy to say, this is not a good time. Can I leave you a flyer and just walk away? Smile, but not like a salesperson. We're not trying to convince people. We're not trying to convert people. It's really just about being open and friendly, as someone mentioned in the chat as well. That's really important, especially now when many people are very wary of people that they don't know for a lot of reasons. It's important to allay their fears in numerous ways, verbally, waving, smiling, our body language, being relaxed and open, our spoken language and our messaging, socially distancing, wearing a mask, all of those are ways of approaching. Stay aware of that. Staying positive, even though we're talking about concerns with potentially negative consequences, and we are interrupting their day, we don't want to just leave them with a gloom and doom message, but really that we can do something together if we're, message. So being open to hearing their thoughts, asking open-ended questions. What are your thoughts about these things? How would you work together around trying to change this dynamic in our community? And as people also said in the chat, people say amazing things. They're wonderful. If someone wants to argue with you, it's really important probably not to engage. That's not necessarily the time for either of you to do that. And so just bow out politely and say, well, I'd like to leave this with you. You never know, someone could read what you have to offer. If they're willing to take it, it may change their mind. They may be willing to seek out more information. Don't pretend to be an expert. It's likely that you will be asked something that you may not know about an issue. And you should never be afraid to admit that you don't know something. It's authentic, it's real. And it shows that just not everybody who has concerns has to be an expert. Really, that's something we fight in all of our work around environmental issues. People don't want to do anything because they're afraid that they know everything. So we want to model that it's okay that you don't know something, but that you can give them some links to like a Facebook page or a website or some information about how they can get the answer to the question that you don't know. Following the script, but speak from the heart. Again, that's really just learning how to talk authentically, how to be open, how to engage, but mostly how to listen well. And take your cues. If someone's, you're sort of saying your script and someone stops you, that's important. If someone says, oh, let me tell you about that, that's important. So being able to give the time without trying to hurry through it is really a valuable thing, because this is such a personal experience. Next slide, please. Okay, so I tried to find a picture of something in Charles City County, but I really couldn't. So this is a home that supposedly is in Charles City County, and it shows the rural nature of the county. So it's coming close, but it's not exactly. I want to talk a little bit about my story of canvassing in Charles City County, from which I learned a lot. Thank you. So I confess now, disclaimer, that everything I just said, I did not do when I canvassed in Charles City County. I ended up going by myself. I didn't really know anything. I did have a map. I had a clipboard, which is really important, but I knew about gas plants. But the person who was supposed to come with didn't show up. And so I just went ahead, and I was getting petition signatures. There were 2 gas plants and a contaminating landfill. I did do my homework, and I did find out there were solar plants that a lot of people confused with this. They have a history of colonization, slavery, and plantations, and an oppressive style of local government, and essentially non-existent communication by local and state government. Next slide. The challenges, it's a rural community. So I thought I was going to walk everywhere, but that quickly was put to the side. It takes a long time, and I eventually had to drive, quite a bit. I spent 5 hours there that day. Even with a map, it was easy to get disoriented. Lots of people. Okay, the goal. I want to tell you some of the most important things. I got 60 signatures, but mostly what I learned is that people are very connected to their home and land. I felt really lucky they would talk to me. Many families have lived there for generations. When you see a beware of dog sign, it's real. Pay attention to it. I got the feeling that not a lot of people get asked what they think, so it felt like a gift to be able to listen to them. And I've learned a lot more since then, and being part of C5 is a wonderful organization. But doing this ground truthing and experience was what really made me want to engage with the community for a longer time. Thanks so much. And now we'll be moving on to our next part of the program, which is on social media.
Hi, everyone. My name is River Mizell, not technical support. I run social media for Mothers Out Front. And I may have worked with some of you on your local social media. And so we just want to talk about why digital organizing is an effective tool for base building, especially in the era of COVID and realizing things like this creates accessibility. This opens you up to new demographics, and is a free and very useful tool. So we can go to the next slide. So I just wanted everyone to talk about in the chat what social media tools they are comfortable with using. It may be different for Mothers Out Front versus your personal, but having comfortability in it in your personal life is important too. So if you just want to leave that in the chat. Oh yeah, LinkedIn is one that I didn't list here. That's a very unique platform for sure, but very useful, definitely. If we can go to the next slide. So before we get started, I just wanted to go over some quick definitions. Analytics are data reading tools that give you a demographic breakdown of your audience. So you can see things like age, where they're from, and gender identity, things like that. Content is what you put out. So your posts, your videos, your tweets, whatever that is. And then a landing page is when you click on something, where do you end up, like on the internet? So here I have listed our Join Us on the Mothers Out Front page. This is where we can collect data from people because they can put in email, address, things like that. If you want to go to the next page. So what is social media used for and why is it effective for base building? Social media is now one of the primary resources for breaking and current news. Most demographics use very much Twitter for breaking news and use resources from trusted friends and businesses to find current news. Specifically for all of our interests, climate change information is now almost exclusively shared on social media and not on traditional media forms. And finally, it's the way we can build community in the era of COVID. It's a way that we can connect with others that we may never have, in a way that gives us a chance to be distant and safe. Next page, please. So social media is a self-feeding cycle. And what that means is if you can do a couple of key things, it will continue to grow itself and put your platforms in front of new eyes with people of shared values. And we'll break down that cycle in these next couple of slides. So if we can go to the next one. So how do you begin feeding the cycle? The first step is to read your analytics, understand who is engaging with your content and who you want to be engaging with your content. You may be very, very effective at reaching people the age of 45 to 65 from your town, but you may not be reaching the millennials you are targeting with whatever information you are sharing, or vice versa. Reading your analytics that social media gives you for free using business platforms allows you to adjust your content to your audience instead of forcing your audience to consume whatever content you put out. Social media is a free resource, so no one is obligated to follow you for any reason. So it's up to us to create high quality content. And that means you're providing a service to the public. You give to the public, you don't request from the public in social media. And ways to do that are, don't use heavy jargon or define your jargon when you're doing that. Assume every person who's interacting with your social media is the very beginner. Be accessible. Use things like camel case, which means when you use like a hashtag, capitalize every word so screen readers can be used. Ensure you have closed captionings in every single one of your meetings, digital meetings, and have strong calls to action with your content. Allow people to engage. That's what people are using social media for. They're not here to be lectured. They're here to build community, ask questions, give them resources, and ask for input. And then finally, following accounts and streamlining your web presence. So this goes into the self-feeding cycle. The people you follow are then made aware of your account and can follow you. They can see your content, share your content, you can share their content, and it becomes building both things, cross promotion. Their audience then gets to utilize your content, and you have just put yourself in front of people who have shared values who may not have heard of us yet. And then streamlining your web presence means where you're sending them, does it have a way for them to engage, to take action, or is it something that's going to scare them? They want to click off right away because it's doom and gloom, and they have no way then to utilize their newfound information to take action. So for Mothers Out Front, that was creating the Join Us page, where now we can send people to put their information in, and they are directly put in contact with an organizer who can schedule a one-on-one as if it was an in-person organizing, because we streamlined that web presence. If we can go to the next page. So breaking it down, the two parts of the self-feeding cycle. The first one is the accounts you follow have an opportunity to follow you. You get new content, they get new content, and you can align the values of new demographics. So if you're aligning with environmental justice groups, following those groups, understanding what their priorities are is a form of ground truthing. You can understand what those groups hold as immediate needs and actions, and you can adjust your organizing off of that information they've provided to you for free. They also have an opportunity to share our content when we're saying we have resources for you, we have ways to take action and follow you. And again, it is a cycle of then their followers can see that content, share that content, give it to their followers, and it feeds itself. And then next slide, please. And then the second part is having that strong call to action is vital. If you provide information to people, giving them resources to take action, just like we do in person, is important. Send them to talk to a real person, not just like your Instagram post, but then where do they go from there? Have you equipped them with these tools to take action for climate justice? And then you're giving yourself data as well. Whenever you're asking them to go to a place, we can collect information. We have email addresses, we have phone numbers, we have interests that we can then utilize for future campaigns. If we can go to the next page. So here's how the cycle works. You start with a demographic analysis. Where are your profiles? Who are they serving, and who do you want to serve? And then as you create that high quality content, continue to do a demographic analysis to ensure that the correct demographics are engaging. And then as you create that high quality content, you're following other accounts and engaging with those accounts and having strong calls to action in your content. And then your social media grows. And that's your form of base building of people of similar values, ground truthing, and in a distance community building way. We're going to go to the next page. So the more you grow, the greater our collective power. If we're doing things like a Twitter storm and things like that, if it's 3 people pressuring the governor, it's not as impactful as if we had 60 people. And then every time you follow an account, you have an opportunity to grow that voice and then create collective power on those pressure building moments, the days of action, the Twitter storms, even the simple join us, and then we are going to do this campaign at this date. It's all, social media can be a long game, and that you collect this data then to analyze and mobilize at a later point. If we can go to the next page, please. And we're doing breakout rooms. As Sheila's going to break it down, I just wanted to mention real quick, if you're here without your group or more people from your teams, can you put in the chat if you would like to learn more about or do a breakout for outreach, tabling, canvassing, or social media? Please pick one. Thank you. And I'll put it in the chat too in case I just talk too fast.
All right, everybody unmute and give some love to our presenters. Thank you to Barb, to Beth, to River, to Jamie, and to Velma. Woo. Thank you. So that was, a real just intro to those 4 different ways of doing our ground truthing, our base building outreach. And now we want to give you some time to go into either your team, if you're here with people from your own team, or if you're not here with people from your own team, you're going to be able to drop into the chat whether you would rather go into a room, focused on social media, canvassing, tabling, or outreach to members of community. It's not going to be a facilitated conversation per se. It's opportunity to work on your own base building plan in one category. So don't spread yourselves thin and try and do all 4 at once. If you're in your team, you're going to decide together, okay, we pick canvassing. And then we have a sheet, if we could have it dropped into the chat here, for the 3 in-person forms of outreach, and then 1 that's different for social media that will be used as a guiding document for you to work either again in your teams or just quietly on your own in your work group, but then you're there with that expert in that topic area who can, and probably I'll have to help Rivers doing breakout rooms right now. So I'll drop it into the chat in a second, these documents I'm talking about. But you're going to be working and you'll have the opportunity to ask questions to the group if you're not with your team. Any questions about the breakout rooms? Okay, so we'll have 15 minutes in the breakout rooms. I know that River is working on breaking you out into your teams or your content areas that you've picked. So I will just take a second and drop into the chat. First, I'm going to drop in. You might need to grab this now. I think it will still show up in your breakout rooms, I hope. This one is the document you'll use for any of the in-person outreach. And I believe River might have the social media one. Let's see if I can get this to drop into the chat for everybody. So if you're doing social media, you're going to use this guiding document, and you have 15 minutes to work on this in your teams or with your content area. So Once River's done, you'll see something pop up, you'll be pulled into your breakout room, and we'll come back together at a little bit after 9:15. Welcome back. Okay, hopefully people are just all popping in right now. Welcome back. I'd like to just move to the next slide, please.
Jim, come here.
And not that one, but the one before it. Yeah, the group report back. So actually, I'm going to ask Laura to close this slide, and we're just having a conversation now. So we have a little less than 10 minutes for people to share out. I know this was a short amount of time to start what can be a very daunting task of creating an outreach plan. But it also is just sort of getting those thoughts flowing. As my English teacher in high school said, it's like getting that shitty first draft first out there, and not getting caught in all the bigness of what it means to begin an outreach plan. So who would like to just share a little bit about what you're thinking for your team or what you discussed in your group just now? What are you going to start doing for outreach and base building? And I'm sorry, you can unmute to say it. So we'd like to, like actually have a little conversation here and get excited by what's going on. We're representing places around the country for Mothers Out Front. So tell us, unmute and tell us what you're going to be doing.
So I'll just speak really quick from the canvassing group. I think one of the two people that joined with the group was, I'm going to mess up their names, Audra and Anne, I believe. And one of the things that we both all started was canvassing is scary, right? So nobody wants to knock on somebody's door like, hey, can I, whatever it is. And so we kind of talked about the pros and cons of it, actually doing it. And we kind of echoed what Barb said about pairing up, like going with people. And I will share this with everyone from C5's experience. There's one lady in our group who is a master at this. Like, she can go and get anybody to talk to her. Like, they'll tell her whole life story. But we also learned, like, don't make people do it who don't want to do it, because it's never going to end up the way you want it. It's going to end up worse. So I suggested to the group, and we also talked about that person that's good at it, like, partner with them so they can teach you, and you can kind of see how they get people to talk to them. And that person is usually the person in your group that everybody confides in or doesn't feel as threatened by. So just want to throw that out there. So for us, it's learning from Cynthia.
Thank you, Lavisha. Who else would like to share a little bit about what you're hoping to do?
Hi, I can share. So I was in the social media group, and a lot of us were just kind of new at social media and trying to learn from each other. But what I didn't know was that there's so many resources that we have access to. And so, like, River let us know with, like, social media, like using some of the content and, like, helping us build that out. I know that when we had our last meeting, I'm in San Francisco, we're just kind of trying to start to rebuild the team. A lot of it was just, like, people wanting to know, like, basic, like, knowledge. And so I feel like putting that out there, because again, as someone said earlier, I think a part of getting involved is that it's overwhelming. Like, even for me, I felt like, well, I don't know enough. So, like, how can I participate? And so if you just give people, like, little bits of information and, like, ways that they can help, and so that it's not so, like, daunting. So I'm thinking of coming out with content on Instagram. That's what we're using right now. I like it because it's very visual. It's also, there's lots of, like, fires right now here in California. So I feel like when people see that and they get, like, the visual of it, we can, like, build content around it. And then just also giving people little bits of information that are, like, bite-sized, so they could get more involved.
Awesome, thank you. Maybe one other person from their group want to share I'd love to hear from a team. Like if you actually started doing any planning in a team of what you're going to implement or would hope to implement. Let's not make it too heavy right now. What do you hope to implement?
Well, I'm north of Boston, and I talked the other night about being pretty rural and not having enough base at all. So we were talking about trying to start by just tabling in the neighborhood, people whom you mostly know, but to get them to sign up and see what you're doing, rather than going to some other place and tabling. And then at that point, we thought that is a town celebration that we would table at also, but we need something to tell people, not just to inform them. So we are hoping to work with our town committee on the zoning rules, because there are some people there on the resiliency committee who want to try and get us to electrify buildings and electrify cars. So partly we're going to go out and find out from them, just talk to them and see what effort could work and help them find out about ordinances and building codes that might actually work here, because they've tried it before and it hasn't worked. So we could be a support in that way. And then we would take that to a table at a town celebration.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. I hope that this is the beginning, a little spark or a seed planted for many of you to, carry into fruition and continue thinking about how to develop these space building ideas and plans moving forward. So we'll go back just to the last couple slides here. If you could pull the slideshow up, Laura. So we are done with the content of the training today. As we did on Tuesday, it's so appreciated. We're going to drop into the chat your feedback form. If people could please fill that out. We'll also send out an email for today's training. And then if you're not a mother, you're probably a mother if you're here tonight. If you're not a member, we'll also drop into the chat a link to become a Mothers Out Front member. And then the last slide is just what's up next. So on Tuesday next week, we'll be doing one-to-one trainings, or actually Adelita Serena, who's one of our organizers of Mothers Out Front, will be presenting on the one-to-one building relationships training. So thank you all for being here tonight and look forward to seeing you on Tuesday. We'll be sending materials out with, all of the things that were presented here today, as well as some additional space building materials to your email. So keep an eye out for that and have a great night. Thank you.